Hello and welcome to the first of our Phantom Cinema podcasts. Today we're going to be talking about Night of the Hunter, and Paul Bareham is here to tell us all about this fantastic film. Paul, tell us a little bit about the film we're about to watch this afternoon, Night of the Hunter.
Okay, made in 1955. It was the only film directed by the eminent actor Charles Laughton, which is a shame, I think, because he makes a good job of it and brings some interesting things to it. He put a lot into it, and it was both a critical and a commercial failure. So it pretty much destroyed his ambition to make any more films. Grown in critical reception exponentially over the years, now considered to be one of the greatest films ever made. And it's a really interesting and odd film. It's a mix of it's similar to a children's fairy tale. Laughton described it as a sort of horror version of Mother Goose. So it's a children's fairy tale, so it's full of archetypes and morality and kids in peril from this really scary bogeyman played by Robert Mitchum, I think he's on career best form. But it's also a product of its times, made in 1955, and it's a noir thriller. So noir was the mechanism by which Americans kind of examined their psyche after the Second World War and dropping the bomb, in much in the same way that Westerns did that for the early part of their history. Noirs are dark and they're full of shadows, and they're driven by strange sexual urges and aberrant psychopathy. And the bogeyman here, the Mitchum character, is also a serial killer. And that's a type of criminal identified for the first time, I think, in film noir. But and then that's a long time before the Criminal Justice Service actually put a name on it.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so can we just talk about the character Robert Mitchum plays, and Robert Mitchum himself as a truly colossus icon of film?
Yeah, he always had a wild side. I mean, he was busted for drugs in the 50s. Didn't make his career problematic at all. He kind of just shrugged his shoulders, and there's a great picture of him in the courtroom being found guilty. And the look on his face, I can't even describe it. Obviously, it's even impossible to describe with a recording. But look it up. Look at his face. He does not give a damn. You know, he really doesn't. So he had this wild side. He left home at the age of 12 after getting into a fight with his headmaster at school. He rode the rails, hobo style, travelled most of the country, did all sorts of jobs, got into women, drink, drugs. He spent some time on a chain gang, escaped and went to California. When he got to California, he was 15 years old. That's the sort of early life that he had. Now, he came into all sorts of danger when he was a youngster riding the rails. He said the most dangerous people of all were those that did terrible things with a Bible in their hands. And his Reverend Harry Powers is that kind of monster. So he's pompous, he's sanctimonious, he's prudish, but he's also a psychopath. You know, he gives us this characterization that's incredibly charismatic, but terrifying. You know, this man's driven by greed and lust, and he sometimes seems less than human. When he's thwarted, he kind of makes these animal, feral noises, and he jumps around like a monkey. You know, the boy in the film, John, says of him, you know, "Don't you ever sleep?" And of course he doesn't. He's the bogeyman. The bogeyman doesn't take a break.
So, I mean, I guess we just said there about Mitchum's backstory that he could well have based his character on somebody that he met or come across during those wilderness years.
I think he probably based it on 100 people that he met. You know, America has this thing, this enormous country, and even with 3 million, 100 million people in it, they don't make a dent on it. It's wild, and it's, you know, the film's set in West Virginia. Their state motto is wild and wonderful. Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is a place that if you look on the map, it seems to be in North America, but actually they firmly consider themselves to be in a part of the southern states. They're in the Appalachians, so they have the mountains, and they're a very wild and rural place. The city of Charleston, which is the state capital, has 50,000 people in it. 50,000. That's about the population of what, Mexborough? You know, this is the state capital, so it's a rural place. I think the Latin of their overall, I think their governor's motto is something along the lines of "Mountaineers are free."
Right. Okay.
It's how strange is that? You know, they're obsessed with the mountains,
a place to roam,
and freedom. You know, like Americans tend to be. I mean, it's a funny place in America. I mean, not always that funny, but you know, they seem to be. It seems to be a place that breeds strange non-conformism. I mean, that's why a lot of people went there in the first place, to get away from religious persecution, to be able to do whatever the hell they want. and that seems to be the Americans, and I think that's probably where we are with Trump, without we'll just get political, is that Trump offers people the chance to do whatever the hell they want, and that the Americans see that as their manifest destiny.
I guess this is kind of manifesting this character that Mitchum plays.
Yeah, I mean, he finds out about an opportunity, he goes for it. It's his to take. The fact that there are casualties on the way, or there will be casualties on the way, is irrelevant to him. All he cares about is the prize.
And the character itself was actually based on a real life person, wasn't it?
Yeah, a serial killer, a guy called Harry Powers, who was he was Dutch. He came over to America for a better life, and that better life included killing a couple of people that he met in a Lonely Hearts type column and their families, just for gain. You know, and sort of a fairly charismatic character that was almost lynched, but ended up being saved, only obviously to get hanged later.
Right. So, interestingly enough, you mentioned Charles Laughton, but and despite the fact that you've just described a fairly kind of shocking, even for now, even for the standards of today, backstory that Robert Mitchum went through. But Charles Laughton actually got on really well with him, and I mean, he was known not to kind of put up with, you know, this sort of masculine behaviour, but he described Mitchum as, you know, very well read, gentle, you know, and was able to hold conversation and think quite deeply about certain issues. So clearly, there was a lot more to his character than this wild side that is painted.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of Mitchum's shtick, I think, is that he's this kind of slightly wild character. But at the same time, he had a very long career in Hollywood. And although he did have some problems, you know, what other actor, a mediocre actor, could get over a drugs bust? And the fact that he got over it is because not only was he an excellent actor, he was also a really decent human being. He was very interested in human rights and in the civil rights movement, but he didn't make a big deal of it. He was very liberal, and also he brought an awful lot to his roles. He didn't just turn up and do it; he contributed to it. And I mean, it's common knowledge that while Laughton was busy coaching the child actors, who were really, really good but required an awful lot of patience, and Charles Laughton was very good at that, Mitchum picked up on some of the directorial duties, so he was doing some of the shooting as well. And I think as a collaborator, he worked really well. I think when he worked with directors that he didn't respect, or actors that he didn't respect, or on projects that he didn't like, he could be difficult. And it's the same with his interviews. If you ever see him being interviewed, he's a very charming, erudite character. He knows an awful lot. He likes music. He likes poetry, and he can recite poetry and talk about literature. Unless you piss him off, and then he's going to be really, really difficult, or pretend to be drunk, you know, or actually be drunk, you know.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the look of the film. Then this was Charles Laughton's only film as a director. Did he make much impact on the way things look, or the style of the film?
Yeah, well, as I say, the book, it's based on a book by Davis Grubb. It was set in West Virginia, and Charles Laughton originally wanted to go and film in the Appalachian Mountains. It's a beautiful location, but obviously very remote and far away from the studio. So the studio said, no, you have to come and film in Burbank, California on a sound set. And I think actually that was the making of the film, because as a documentary, I think documentary style, I think it would have less impact. So Laughton did, he worked with Stanley Cortez, great cinematographer, and he worked on very, very closed sets. Close sets. There's a lot of action that takes place around a river. That's all in a tank. You know, and they used optical effects and just clever lighting and set design to give you this feel of this world. And it's never a real world feel. It always seems like a pantomime or something you might see at the theatre. Some of the scenes remind me of the old Balinese puppet theatre, or you know, that sort of style.
Shadow theatre.
Yeah, daguerreotypes. And I think Laughton was very influenced by German expressionism. So you've got, you know, distorted figures and stylized shapes and exaggerated angles that disorient you, but also help to emphasize the emotions like fear and shame, whatever really. But also very, very heavily influenced by silent films. And I think silent films get a bit of a bad rap because, I mean, you know, we worry sometimes, oh, this film's from 1955, it's black and white, will people come to it? Because entertainment's moved on and the way people enjoy it has moved on. But silent films from probably about just after the war to about 1928 when they were finally swept away by films like The Jazz Singer and the sound became the thing. They created their own language. You know, they didn't have any dialogue, and they tried to keep titles to a minimum. And they're very, very, very eloquent in their visual imagery and the devices they use, the ellipses and the cuts and the scene setting. And they're very eloquent. I think it's such a shame that was swept away, if you like. And for a good 10 years after the advent of sound, films took a very much a backward step and just became records of plays.
And like a stage setting, and the camera was just placed in front of the actors.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was directors like Hitchcock that kind of, you know, brought that back to the idea of the camera as an eye that moved around and had a subjective as well as an objective view. But certainly directors like Murnau and Pabst were doing incredible things with the language of film, and all without the benefit of any dialogue or any sound.
Yeah. Okay, so made in 1955 in black and white, but obviously we don't want that to put you off. It's a fantastic film. It's got a fantastic central performance by Robert Mitchum, as we've been talking about, and it's shot very expertly by Charles Laughton. Even though it was his only film, it was a commercial failure, wasn't it? Upon release, the critics didn't like it either, and I think
the studio didn't like it, so I don't think they did very much with it. They didn't really know what to do with it. And it is a very strange film. It doesn't seem to be. It's in lots of traditions, but at the same time, it kind of combines those in a unique way. So although the style isn't necessarily that idiosyncratic, if you know a little bit about film history, you've seen a few of its forerunners, I think its impact is absolutely unique. I think it feels and makes you feel like no other film. And although it's the oldest film we've ever shown, I think it's probably the most timeless.
There we go. So that's Night of the Hunter. We're showing at Doncaster Little Theatre. Doors open at 1 p.m. and you can get a ticket for £5, which is an absolute bargain.
It's ridiculous. It's like 1955 prices.
Yeah. So thanks very much for talking to us, Paul. We'll be back in a few weeks' time with The Man Who Fell to Earth.
The unmissable Man Who Fell to Earth. Come along, because, you know, not only is it David Bowie's best performance, it's just an amazing film, one that I saw when I was a kid and have never, ever got over.
Thanks for talking to us today, Paul.
Thank you.